Hello and welcome to the Intentional Clinician podcast. I'm your host, Paul Krauss, licensed professional counselor. In today's episode, my special guest, Joshua Nave, licensed master of social work, is going to be talking to me about power, abuse, and control, both in domestic violence situations, but also cultural entities, organizations, and society as a whole. We're going to be talking about all of these tactics, what to do, what the types of abuse are, cultural considerations, and also how to reclaim one's voice. Now, if you're in an emergency, you must dial 911 right now. And if you're not sure and you are in some type of crisis, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233, or go online to chat at www.thehotline.org. Joshua Nave, licensed master of social work, is a therapist in Grand Rapids, Michigan that offers trauma-informed talk therapy and EMDR therapy services to people suffering from anxiety, trauma, and other things. He also offers online therapy to people across the state of Michigan. Joshua has been offering specialized trauma and anxiety services for over 4 years to a diverse community of individuals and seeks to offer healing to all people. His therapy approach focuses on integrating his clients' beliefs, cultural and family history, and unique story into the therapy approach in order to accurately help the whole person. Joshua is interested in helping any individual, regardless of race or background, overcome their own trauma, accessorial trauma, or simply their anxiety about life in order to obtain the better life they want. Joshua is EMDR Level 2 certified with over 5 years of experience in the field of social work and therapy. Joshua also possesses experience working with a variety of populations, including members of the LGBTQ and the BIPOC community. If you're looking for therapy, you can check out his website, which will be in the show notes at www.healthforlifegr.com, or call the office 616-200-4433, and he accepts most insurance plans. All right, now let's get to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Joshua Nave, licensed master of social work. I'm glad to have you on today.
Glad to be here, Paul. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And so today's episode, we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, both in the micro and the macro, but we're going to be definitely covering power and abuse. So I guess let's start out. Why do we need to cover power and abuse in a podcast?
Well, at least in my opinion of the matter, right? Like, generally speaking, from what I've seen from clients and things we've worked with, there are a few things quite like power and specifically the abuse of power that can strip someone of their ability to really chart the direction of their own life and ultimately, have control over their own lives, right? So especially nowadays with where society's going, the impact, the struggle, the stress that our culture is facing right now, at least in my eyes as a clinician, we've been seeing an increase of people coming into this center and services who have experienced some kind of abuse in their life. So,
okay. Well, I think that's a good reason. So oftentimes people, when they think about abuse, they sort of just put it in a category like, oh, well, it's just domestic abusers that do this. These are just people that do this. But I think there's a lot of different types of abuse that happen. And the reason we bring power into it is oftentimes the reason somebody does abuse somebody is to maintain control or power over somebody. So maybe let's just start with the basics of abuse between two people. Can we talk about kind of the domestic violence realm? So let's start there, maybe physical abuse. What's that about?
Yeah, sure. So again, like domestic violence, physical abuse is probably the one that we're all most familiar with hearing about, right? This is ultimately where generally an intimate relationship, a home life, a family structure, you're going to see one partner, often the male, though it could also be the female in the relationship. Basically, the individual who has the power of the relationship will often use that power in a physical way to harm, strike, to maybe manipulate, or cause maybe even, again, part of that whole thing, sexual abuse too, in that domestic violence situation to take the control from their partner and ultimately control the relationship.
and basically control the relationship, and oftentimes that's based out of fear or a habit or something else. But it is we as a society say this is wrong, that in a relationship there needs to be shared power and control, and people have to be able to have their own autonomy even within a relationship. But oftentimes people have been taught values that are contrary to kind of what I would say our current society's state and law enforcement says is appropriate. So, for instance, in a fight between two people, there might be an argument, and it might get escalated, which is quite normal for couples to have an argument where they might...
healthy fights.
Yeah, they might argue and raise their voice, but what's not normal is when one of the partners pushes or grabs or punches or hits and, says these sort of things. Now, if it was just as simple as that, you'd say, well, obviously the right thing to do is to call the police and have the person arrested and prosecute them and then leave the relationship. But we often see that in the cycle of abuse, people don't, because they have a positive association with the person, usually from the beginning or the honeymoon portion of the relationship. And then what happens is tension grows, and maybe that person wants to do something or hang out with somebody or make a financial decision that the other person doesn't agree with. And in the argument, the other person goes what we would call over the line and hits them or causes them physical harm. And you said often the male, and that's often the case, but it can also be a female or depending on what type of relationship we're talking about. And that instills fear. But it also instills like a feeling of being trapped because now this person has not given me a fair arguing stage. Now they're taking it to the physical level, but yet oftentimes when people are caught beating somebody, they'll say, oh, it was just this one time, I lost my temper, I'm just so angry, I just didn't mean to, and please love me. And then the person feels like, okay, I've got to take them back. And oftentimes I would say they don't really have a problem with anger management because if they're at a job and all day long they don't punch their boss, or they don't punch a coworker, but yet they go home and punch their girlfriend, then clearly this isn't about anger. It's about controlling the partner. Yeah. And usually there underlies a lack of communication and a lack of healthy communication to be able to get through difficult conversations with appropriate attachment, and thus one person tries to dominate the other. So what are your thoughts about physical abuse in relationships?
Yeah, like on the baseline of it, I'm going to kind of maybe go into that a little bit. One of our talking points is going to be at some point, might as well even kind of get into it now a little bit, what kind of people go about trying to do abuse, right? And honestly, it's a lot in what you're talking about right here. Like, we're looking at individuals who generally, like, they're going to struggle to communicate their points. They often feel powerless themselves. Maybe they've been victimized in their own life. Sometimes you can be individuals who are suffering from, heavy doses of narcissism, right? Effectively, these are individuals that generally, internally, right, feel very weak, very powerless. And so when that comes out in a relationship, again, generally speaking, these people are going to use that physical capabilities, their arms, their power, the environment around them, frying pans, they're going to use basically what they have at their disposal to exert their power over their partners. And a lot of times too, right, that's going to come off kind of as you were mentioning, right? There's that talk of, oh, it didn't happen too often, didn't happen this, and I was just angry and I couldn't control. A lot of these individuals believe that they are actually the victim in the matters, and that's going to come to a popular term that we're throwing around in culture nowadays, that gaslighting, right? These individuals, again, in their own mind, believe that I never would have done this if you had just done these things, right? And that heavily pushes them to not only be the abuser, but often convince the victims that ultimately you were the reason this took place in the first place. And a lot of victims of abuse end up feeding into that cycle, that belief, because again, your abuser is generally not always a horrible person. A lot of times they can be funny, they can be sweet, they can be kind, they can be loving, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more at some point about the abuse cycle. Part of the whole problem with making it difficult to leave abusive situations, even if it is as straightforward as we'd say physical abuse, one where it's like we can all say, oh, he hit you, that's bad, right? Again, just so people understand, I'm going to be using the gender term he quite often in here to just reference the abuser. It's mostly what most of our work in evidence we have written about abuse is currently written in. So again, try to use this term interchangeably. It could be they, it could be she, it could be anyone, right?
Very good. Yes, and that's a good point. So oftentimes people that abuse, whether it be physical, emotional, sexual, financial, digital, stalking, or even on the macro level if they're a person in power, such as in the government, they staunchly believe they're the victim. Because in psychology, we found that people don't really think they're ever doing the wrong thing.
Nope.
We have this power of rationalization. We have implicit bias, where we, are biased based on our viewpoints. We have a lot of people have a difficulty having empathy for others and empathy for people that are not like them. And they feel entitled. And it could be based on their attachment style with their parents. It could be based on history. It could be based on where they were raised or what messages they're getting culturally. But they actually believe that they were forced to hit you, or forced to emotionally scream at you, or forced to sexually manipulate you, or forced to take the money, or forced to stalk you digitally, or because you won't do X, what they want, which we see that as the opposite of intimacy, because intimacy means that we are both giving up some of our defenses to come together in a relationship where we are open to the other person's perspective and also trying to find a way to act as a couple that is not destructive towards one of us or the other. And that engages a lot of communication, and it takes a lot of vulnerability. But people that abuse, they don't often like vulnerability. They want to be the person in control. And so this has happened, and even culturally, I think even in the last 40 years, this used to be something I'd heard in movies, which is, what did you do to make him do that to you?
Pretty common term, yeah.
Right. Or that boys, this is a terrible toxic thing that parents tell their daughters. Oh, there's a boy picking on you at lunchtime at the recess. That means he likes you.
Yeah.
That is the most terrible idea to ever say to a little girl.
Know how to use his words. Right. He has to pull your hair. That's the only way he can express himself.
Right. Or vice versa. So it lets, traditionally males off the hook for bad behavior because, statistically they're more aggressive. Because of possibly testosterone.
Probably testosterone.
And so, but that, I think that sells males short. I do think that males have a great capacity for empathy and emotions and communication and learning to have intimacy with a partner, whether it be male or female or they or other. But oftentimes, I think that we know it's the shortcut to use violence. Yeah. And, that's an easy way to get things done, but it doesn't mean it's long-term not going to have terrible side effects.
Yeah, a lot of, again, I'll go on that point real quick. Like, I've got a background in infant toddler mental health, right? Like, anyone who's ever been around children, any parent out there understands the basic, hopefully has been through the situation of, I'll use the example, Bobby gets upset. Bobby's angry. You've taken his toy. Bobby swings his fist, right? It's secondhand nature, effectively, for a kid, any child, right, to generally resort to some kind of physical aggression when their way isn't being met. So a lot of times we see in these abusers, they are kind of stuck in that infantile space. I've never learned how to move past getting my way without physical abuse, without this abuse, and they use that like kids do, basically.
So perhaps from a trauma-informed perspective, their parenting or growing up situation did not provide them with enough incentives to solve things with words, and they didn't have enough consequences or negative results from using violence, and therefore they move into a relationship, and when they are escalated, because most of these things happen when people are emotionally escalated. They're not in their calm state, they're in a sympathetic nervous system state, and then they act out. And so some people feel powerless over that. But we're only powerless if we don't have the tools to communicate, and we are listening only through our lens, and we aren't really listening to the other person. We want what we want. That's inflexibility. And then the abuser may think, I can get my way by essentially being a terrorist. You're terrorizing the person by hitting them. But it's not just hitting. So some people have said, and I heard this on a domestic violence podcast, some people have said, physical abuse is terrible, but it was more infrequent. But what was happening every day was emotional abuse. So can you tell us a little bit about emotional abuse? What is that?
Yeah, so emotional abuse really, again, like putting it simple to start with, and we can get in more detail from there, is literally trying to use one's emotions to cause harm to another, right? Think of it again, if I'm swinging my fist to cause harm to you, that's going to make you listen. Well, I'm going to use words that I know are going to tear down your self-esteem. I'm going to tear down your self-image, right? These could be examples of backhanded compliments like, like, wow, like that dress looks good on even you, right? Perfect example of a compliment that leaves you kind of standing there going, oh, did they insult me? Did they just compliment? I'm a little confused here. Constant reminders of maybe, saying you're not good enough for this. Remember, you're not like other people. You're not smart enough. You're not that. Basically, emotional abuse is the daily, regular tool that an abuser is going to utilize, again, to keep you in the relationship. Again, a lot of abusers are going to use this to tear you down on a daily basis before I ever need to hit you until you start believing you're right. I'm awful. I'm not that great. I'm actually kind of maybe even, a little blessed that my abuser is with me because I'm pretty awful and no one else would be with me.
Right. So that not only keeps the person in the relationship with control, but I actually think the abuser's motive goes beyond just keeping them in the relationship, beyond codependence. I think it actually goes to, I want this person to stay the same way I want them. So I want them to do something for me. I want them to give me sex the way I want it. I want them to give me food or dress the way I want and talk to who I want. And therefore, I can't really see them as a whole person. I objectify them in some way. And, playing mind games with them, humiliating them, making them feel guilty, calling them names, but then apologizing. So it's like a back and forth, kind of like playing ping pong. Like one moment I'm putting you down, the next moment I'm building you up so that you're using, and this is kind of crazy, but if we go trauma-informed completely, people bond during times of great stress.
Yeah.
So during times of great stress, like war, soldiers will bond together and feel this bond. Yeah. But just like that, an abuser can use the stress that they're inflicting on you and then flip it into a I love you moment to make the person who they're abusing bond to them emotionally because you have heightened adrenaline. But then if you move into physical affection, you have oxytocin and making those sort of memories together. Yeah. Another part of emotional abuse is intimidation. So making somebody afraid by using looks, actions, or gestures, smashing things around the house, destroying their property, abusing pets, displaying weapons. Even if you say, well, I'm not going to hurt you, but you're making me angry. You're making me break our dishes, right? Coercion or threats. I'm going to report you. I'm going to put you in the hospital. I'm going to tell your mom about this. I'm going to tell your dad about this. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill myself if you leave. I'm gonna complete suicide. You need to do this illegal thing for me. You need to take drugs to somebody. Using children, if there's children involved, you're the worst parent ever. I'm gonna call CPS on you. I'm gonna take the children away if you leave me. I'm gonna pay off this lawyer to make sure you never see your children again.
Yeah, classic. You're wrecking our family.
Right, and even further controlling somebody by saying, I don't want you to talk to that girlfriend. She's a bad influence on you. Don't read those sort of books. That's bullshit. You don't watch shows like Oprah. Don't watch self-empowerment shows.
Yeah, basically trying to isolate the person from anyone who would tell them otherwise.
Right, and doing it in such a way that it starts out slow. It doesn't usually explode because in the first part of the relationship, there's got to be these positive influences, these positive honeymoon period, we call it, where the everything is so good. It's not like everything's always bad. It's just, it's bad if you act out of line with what the controller wants you to do or what the abuser wants you to do. Yeah. Another one I've seen is, we'll get to that one. So that's kind of some of the emotional abuse. What are your thoughts about how emotional abuse affects somebody and more things around that line?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to like kind of what you said when we started transitioning to this topic, right? The physical abuse wasn't, maybe like a lot of us are going to be like a lot more shocked, a lot more afraid by the physical abuse, but honestly, it's the emotional abuse that is more of the insidious nature. It's the one that changes how I see myself, how I view myself, how I hold myself, right? Now, use examples from millions of different clients I've worked with at this point, right? Just the kind of concept of when I came into the relationship, I thought one way, I held myself in one standard, I had these beliefs about my capabilities, and by the end of the relationship, even now that I'm out of it, I feel like I'm worthless. I feel like I'm this. I feel like the things he says is true, and I don't know where my confidence went. And that goes with that, as Paul was kind of talking about, right? It's that slow, steady steps. Like, he's a loving, kind person. He just exploded violently or, emotionally was saying this about me, and afterwards he apologizes, sweet, and goes, well, it's only because you make me so mad sometimes. That easy statement of turning the whole problem on you, and you start to question, oh, right, he's wonderful, he's good, he's kind, he's all these things. It must be something I did. I must have done something. That must have really agitated him. I need to change that. And it's that steady stream, right? Like the one after another. It's not like he sits down and has a list of 20 different things that he has a problem with. It's one small thing. Well, I just really don't like it when you do your hair like that. I'm like, well, okay, it's not that big of a deal if I change that, right? And then one after another.
I've even heard it in more of a subtle way, where the person goes, you're always so emotional. Mm-hmm. Don't be so emotional. If you weren't so emotional, then I wouldn't withdraw my affection. And if you weren't so needy all the time, I wouldn't be angry at you.
Yeah.
And you really are out of control, and people see that, and people don't like that. When really that's called projection, because oftentimes that same person is out of control emotionally. They're emotionally not sober. And we call that emotional sobriety is when you can maintain, through difficult emotions, see emotions as states of being, be able to work through them, talk about them, feel them. But oftentimes the projection happens where somebody takes what they're feeling and puts it on the person that they're trying to control.
And that is a very heavy theme I think we see with people who are using abuse often, right? I have something inside of me. I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to cope with it. I have these beliefs. Again, baseline of I'm not good enough to keep someone in a relationship. So I'm going to constantly project that outward on my partner. If my partner realizes how awful they are, they won't leave me because internally I'm feeling like no one wants to stay with me.
Very good point. So that brings up the schema of what people believe relationships are. So, that all depends on your cultural lens, how you were raised, what you think, what your fantasies are, what you've seen in your life. So oftentimes somebody, like you're saying, like the abuser, the controller is going, I don't feel good about myself. I feel like a loser. So why would they ever stay with me? So I've got to put them down so they do stay with me. But just like that, they may have an idea that, and not for lack of a better word, that your role is to cook me food every day at 6 o'clock, is to not say anything rude, and to give me sex whenever I want it, and don't complain, and don't have emotions. Yeah. And they actually might think that that's how a relationship is supposed to go, that one person serves the other, and that's what happens, maybe because their mother or their father served them, or
culture at a whole.
Culture, or their messages they're getting from cultural leaders or people they listen to, and therefore the other person is going, well, my scheme of a relationship is that two people work together, we come together, we have mutual things, we both serve each other in different ways, we both have positives, we try to build each other up. And the other person's not interested in that. And so that can cause there to be tension, which can lead to physical and emotional abuse, and then sexual abuse. Because here's one of the things. Not only does the abuser may not even know that they're fully doing this. They just know that they're getting what they want. It's not like they sat down and plotted abuse, right?
Again, I would say on a daily basis, Paul, how often do you have the average person that's really intuitive and reflective of their self, and now we're taking this concept of an abuser, someone we're setting the stage for often is struggling with all these internal concepts of self-worth and loathing, right? It's going to be a rare day we actually meet someone, and hopefully that's not the common abuser who is actively reflecting, going, yes, I feel awful about myself, I'm going to actively do all these things. Most of them, again, like we said, I'm the victim. I would never be doing these things if they would just be what they're supposed to be, act how they were supposed to act, treat me how they were supposed to treat me.
I've even heard of a domestic abuse where it's like somebody said, when I come home from work, I need hot food and I need you to smile. So that's a rigid expectation of codependency on the other person to make them food and smile. And if something's off, then the other person gets punished by emotional or physical abuse.
Yeah.
So let's
I'll make a quick note of that if you're all right with that. Like, again, as we talk through this, we're not saying like any of these. This is an important note too, right? Like, how do you start to switch into, becoming the abusee, the victim of this matter, right? A lot of these requests, right? Like, we're going to talk about them and we're going to say them in ways that, like, hopefully you guys can understand real quick. It's like, I can't believe they're saying that. A lot of these requests aren't that terrifying requests, right? Like, hey, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. If you could have me some warm food when I get home, that'd be great, right? Like, that's a perfectly reasonable request for anyone to make of any of their partners, especially in a relationship, right? Yes. It's the follow-up of what happens when the request isn't done.
Or done to exact specificity.
Yes, like, right? This is the more thing. Like, and abusers are sometimes going to even come back and it's done to the standard they want, and they'll still scream at you for it and still find a way that you've done something wrong and should have done better, right? Because that is all about the abuse cycle, right? On the baseline, the simplest logic would be if we just did it exactly what they wanted, okay, they'll never get mad. But we see time and time again, people who are in abuse and control cycles, those abusers are seeking power. They're going to find a reason to take it out on you. If they had a bad day at work, they're going to come home and like, oh, my father used to use the classic example, I can't do anything about my boss, but I can come home and I can kick the dog, right?
Right.
So I'm going to come home and you've done all of it's perfect. You've done everything I've asked. I'm going to blame you for something. I'm going to take it out on you. And I'm just going to say again, like, if you could have just had it right.
So not only is it control, but keeping the person in a power dynamic that is winning. Because let's just say the person comes home, they made the request for hot food and a smile. They had hot food and a smile.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, thank you so much. I feel closer to you. Intimacy starts, right? Now, that could happen. Yeah. But what if the person doesn't like intimacy? They want power. Yeah. They have this complex inside of them that's subconscious, perhaps. They aren't really reflective of it. And they go, well, how do I keep my power over this person? Because what if they leave me tomorrow? If I finally say good job, they may decide they don't need to do it anymore. So I go, oh my gosh, these potatoes were done wrong. Can't you ever cook potatoes? What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Right?
Or I hate potatoes. Why did you put potatoes on this plate?
You know I like rice.
You know this is Thursday.
It's Thursday, right? So it's these rigid kind of, and I would say selfish.
Yeah, it's
a selfish
whole point of power and control, right? It's all about me. I'm not doing it for someone else, right? I would maybe I'm old school in this belief. I kind of think of often if you're loving someone, you are being selfless. Right? So if you're thinking about having power and control over someone, think of it as the opposite of loving someone. It's all about me.
So if I'm having power and control over somebody and deliberately, especially doing it, even if I'm subconsciously doing it deliberately, yeah, it is about me. It's what I want. It's not about a mutual interest.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. We're going to get into why people abuse and control soon, but I want to make sure we touch on some other ones. So sexual abuse. What is sexual abuse?
Well, again, sexual abuse, I think the easiest way to define it is any unwanted, asked for physical contact, effectively, right? It could be as something as small as someone putting their hand on your shoulder. When I didn't ask for that, I didn't want that, right? That's not something we discussed. And something as large as someone forcing themselves upon you, an intimate partner, rape, we'd say, right? So it could be, again, like it could start off even just like the guy at your office who's always giving you that look and winking at you as you come by. Again, it's clearly not wanted, it's not deserved, it's not appropriate to the space, and yet there is that continued physical act that's being done against your will.
Right, in a sexual way. And I definitely think that oftentimes sexual abuse starts out quite subtle. It's not, I mean, obviously there's the cases where somebody goes from zero to rape, but oftentimes sexual abuse is, in a way, clandestine and manipulative to the point where it's the sexual, and the reason it's abuse is it's not consented to. And it's all about the one person's sexuality and not the others. So with that, that's a way of keeping somebody, hostage in a relationship, and therefore obviously can be very abusive. But then obviously, I've heard it, the gaslighting term again, and the movie came from the movie Gaslight, where the guy was deliberately trying to make his wife insane to get out of something. In the movie, you can go watch it. It's from like 1930 something, but essentially, it's trying to do something to somebody, but make them think it's their fault. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, in rape situations, you've heard all the excuses. I mean, luckily, the Me Too movement has sort of shine a light on that. But they say, well, I had to because you know how I get if I don't have sex within so many days, and you're the only sexual partner I have, so I have to have sex with you, and this is the way I want to have sex. And so it can be manipulative, too, as well as it can be unwanted, but it can also be, like, foisted upon by, like, arguing, which is emotional abuse, and demanding. And then it can become a combination of physical and sexual abuse. So, any comments on that?
I guess that's like the baseline of it, where like, again, we've been trauma therapists for a while now, right? How often do you have someone coming in with just a single point of trauma?
Never.
I mean, like, I've met like maybe one guy that comes in. I'm like, wow, I'm actually shocked. I'm like, we only have this to work on. That's surprising, shocking. Same thing with abuse, right? The abusers have a toolbox of things under their belt. They are going to use several methods. It's not going to be just like walk in, slap you, and that's all he ever does, right? It's going to be emotional abuse. It's going to be this. It's going to be that. They're going to use a variety of things,
and then combine that with the positive things, trying to do positive things to make up for it, or to overly commit to you and in odd ways promise things. So let's talk about financial abuse. So some of these methods are preventing your partner from getting a job or keeping a job, making them ask you every time they want money, giving them a strict allowance instead of having access to all the funds, taking their money and using it without their permission, not letting them know how to access the family income or accounts. We see this all the time. So in a lot of divorce situations, people will do what they call a forensic financial investigation, and they'll find that one of the people that was maybe in a more power and control role in the relationship has taken money slowly out of the family account and put it into some sort of other accounts. I've heard of examples of people going to the grocery store and having to call their partner from the checkout line and saying, how much can I write this check for these groceries? And then transferring the money, basically starving them, and then using all sorts of arguments. And that keeps them out of power and out of control, because if you wanted to leave this person, you have no access to money. You may not have a job. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, again, like, if we're talking about, like, even just modern culture right now in America, right? Like, let's talk about rental rates. We're talking about home spaces in general, being able to find a new place to live. It is so costly to get a new place, right? And a lot of these financial abuse situations, right? Like, again, let's say credit history literally could have been in one individual's name for years now, where you don't even have a credit score. So even if you didn't have the money, you don't have any money, right? You can't even get an apartment, right? Or maybe you have enough money, you literally can't get a place to stay, right? So if we're looking about even kind of just culturally where we're at as a society right now, financial abuse is almost one of the strongest ways an abuser has to keep someone trapped within the relationship. There's nowhere for you to go. If they've done their job right and they've isolated you already from family, from friends, things like that, you literally may have no option to escape outside. Again, we're going to get into this, and there's going to be some references at the end here for like different shelters there are available, different programs, different hotlines. There are a lot of supports out there to help you get out. Just in the meantime, it may feel like I'm trapped. There's no way to escape this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are ways out, and we will talk about those. They'll be in the show notes, too. The domestic violence abuse hotline will be in the show notes, and there are local lines as well. Often people call those lines. They program in their phone as a different name to make sure that they're hiding it. There are actually secure chats on the internet that will not show up on your browser history as well for the domestic violence hotline. Police can help you with that as well. And there are shelters for that are specific. They are not homeless shelters. They are shelters for people that have been abused. Digital abuse. Thoughts on that? That's newer.
Well, I'd say it's been around for a bit, but maybe the extent to which we see it hasn't been as widespread because, again, we're talking about I'm going to talk about our Gen Zers for a minute here, right? My younger siblings, right, could be your children, Paul, if you had some, right?
True.
But we're talking about our Gen Zers, right? Like one of the big characteristics we're looking at with this generation is, I heard the one saying, being said, born with an iPhone in your hand, right? This is the age of the smartphone, effectively, right? We are looking at a time, worldwide in history now that we have more access to more information and more ability to figure out what's going on with each other, talk about each other, connect with each other more than ever before, right? So digital abuse is literally just take the abuses we've just talked about and go with that. I can now, place a picture of you online. I can make a meme about you online. I can defame you to your boss online now. I can spread rumors instantly everywhere about you online. And again, in many cases too, right? Again, I like to talk about the cultural context, right? We, again, if we're looking to your and my generation, Paul, are not always adept at understanding what's true or false on the internet. We live in an age where someone can create a falsity about you where many people who are even close to you may believe to be true, might be denied jobs, may be denied this, just simply with a photo or two.
That's a good point. And not only can they do it in the way of posting about you or having a picture for ransom, but also I've heard in certain couples, they will take over all your passwords.
Yeah.
And so they will be able to see who you're talking to, where your location is. They will
be you if they want.
What's that?
Pretend to be you.
Pretend to be you. Yep, I was getting to that one. Yeah. And so just there's lots of ways that all of these things can be used digitally. So I think there's plenty to say there, but we need to get into the other parts. So let's talk about the stalking. What is stalking?
Yeah, I mean, I hope we all know what stalking is.
Sure.
For now, right? Basically, right, we've got an individual with, again, either one of two, right? An individual that is following you, checking in on you, trying to learn more about your life, again, without your knowledge, right? We'd go with an obsessive point, right? Hell, we can even do with the basics, right? I've heard college kids going oh yeah, I'm just doing a little Facebook stalking right now just to see how they're doing. And we laugh right now because hopefully we're all okay, this seems less harmful, right?
Right.
The stalking we're talking about when it comes to abuse and power cycles are effectively, there's such a deep dive into your life, and this could be digitally or physically, that they know your schedule, they know what you're doing, they know where you are. And again, a lot of abusers want to use stalking to, if I know everything about your life, I have more power, the more ability to exert control over your life, right?
Right, and I can intimidate you. So for instance, if I knew someone's schedule, I could show up and just be casually on the sidewalk or in a restaurant that they may be in, and I might just start showing up in these places, not even saying anything to them, but that is obviously going to make somebody uncomfortable if they didn't want me there, right? And how do I know they're there? And that can just be, that's a way of intimidation. And it's a way to kind of use all of the ways that we've talked about, people using power and control and abuse over people to control them. It's just another level, right? Because then it's am I crazy or did I just see them again, right? And then how do I prove it to the police that this person is actually stalking me if they didn't come ring my doorbell or something? They may just have been at the store every time I'm at the store. How do I prove that? So it's another thing that can make somebody psychologically paranoid. So yeah, I think that's a good definition of some of the types of abuse. So now we've kind of touched on why do people do this, but I think we should probably just kind of lay it out. There's more than we've got here for reasons people do it, but the biggest reason we think people abuse, according to what I've read in the literature, is power and control. And for different reasons. Again, a lot of people that abuse believe they are the victim, that they are entitled to this, that it is their right, which is a lack of intimacy, and actually smacks of narcissism. Maybe they are not actually narcissistic personality, but every child and teenager is egocentric.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all about us, because that is how we develop our sense of self. That's how we develop our ability to keep ourselves safe. And it's a natural part of development for children to actually sort of act like narcissists.
I will go with this too, right? We've got to look into that cultural consideration too, right? Think of it again, right? Kind of like a sunglasses, right? Like we put on sunglasses, maybe my sunglasses are red, right? I've got a red tint to them. So everything I see is kind of a tint of red to them, right? Every culture gives you a different pair of sunglasses where we put on, and it kind of colors our view in a certain way, right? This is America. And in America, this is the land of freedom, right? In America, as the land of freedom, we are taught you can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want. You can become anything you want, right? If we're looking at a spectrum, and everything is kind of run in a spectrum, America falls very heavily on the spectrum of individualism, right?
Versus collectivism, right?
Oh, very far away, right? And so if we look at that, if we've got, as Paul said, a normal, healthy part of human development to be individualized in our adolescence, and then we say, okay, the sunglasses this person's already wearing is American. They are American. We're going to get some of the most narcissistic, individualized adolescents that come out of this world, really.
I couldn't agree with you more about that. And I think a lot of people don't even realize that they're teaching that individualism itself, while can be a good thing because you can define yourself and be your own person, and we often find it healthy to be able to individuate from your family, meaning that you understand what your family's culture is, you respect your family's culture, but maybe you don't exactly follow it exactly the way they did to kind of stop the cycle of power and abuse.
Yeah.
But it can also have a very toxic dark side,
yeah,
which is that everything is about me. I'm entitled. I can be anything I want. Other people's feelings don't matter. Other people's belief systems don't matter. My belief system matters. The way I feel, my idea of truth matters. My culture is the dominant culture. And this belief system of egocentrism that extends past childhood into adulthood can be very violent, both emotionally and eventually physically, especially digitally. You see it right now, there is bullying online. So, for instance, somebody has an experience and they talk about it. They talk about it online on TikTok or Twitter or something. Or somebody's in a movie, or a musician makes a statement, or a musician makes a song, or somebody breaks through in a different way. Then there's legions of anonymous online attackers who will make threats, bully, malign, spread lies. And this sort of thing is leaking all over our culture. And I do think it has some roots in this sort of narcissistic my way or the highway type sort of cultural value that is sort of instilled through everything from parenting to media to just even the way politicians and people in churches talk, some churches.
I would say probably several churches.
Well, yeah.
It does seem to, again,
I didn't want to stereotype everything.
We're not trying
generalizing.
We're not trying to stereotype against a religion here. We're trying to take knowledge of a culture, right?
The American culture, the United States.
Yeah,
right?
and we don't. Again, I hope. I mean, maybe some of you out there have got a pretty good finger on the pulse of American culture, but part of American culture is not talking about American culture, not really even identifying that there is an American culture, right? Again, we call this the melting pot effect of America, right? Wherever you came from, it doesn't matter anymore. Whatever culture you were from, that's not part of it. You are now American. You are part of our system, right? It's a unique concept, right? I'm drifting a little bit. I'm not going to try to drift too much here. The culture talk always gets me going, but the point of this we're trying to make here is we look at this, right? And like Paul was saying, right? Somebody posts online about their success. You're going to see a lot of abusers come out, kind of like what we just talked about. I'm feeling internally less than, right?
Right.
Somebody has just posted their accomplishment online, and I see it and go, I am less than again. I am not good enough again. Here's this person being successful. But again, I am not self-reflective. Generally, I'd say most cultures don't do a great job of teaching self-reflection. That's not a common thing I see in trends that happen, right? So if I am feeling this negative way, but it's not because I feel bad about myself or something like that, and I'm looking at this post, this thing that this person did, clearly it's that person who's at fault. That's why I feel this way. So they must have cheated, they must have lied, they must have done something. They're this terrible person in this way, right? Maybe they're just rich, right?
Or we can go conspiracy. Maybe they've made a deal with the devil. Maybe they're part of the, quote, Illuminati.
Or Biden.
Maybe they're part of the deep state, which doesn't exist.
They could have made it, Biden, Trump, someone.
Right. And so there's this sort of, when in times of stress, I actually read this article recently, in times of stress, there are many more beliefs in conspiracy theories.
Oh, yeah.
And this has been going back for thousands of years. This is a long-term study. But one of the things, we don't want to go into conspiracy theories completely, but that is one reason people will justify to abuse others and to even take the life of someone else because of a theory that fits their viewpoint. And they can't evolve into a viewpoint of other people having the right to talk about their cultural belief system in the melting pot, to have different opinions in the melting pot. And that is something we see. Why do people control and abuse? Because they have a belief in their rightness. Yeah. So righteousness is tied to anger.
Oh, yeah.
Oftentimes when people are angry, they're angry because they feel as if they've been wronged and they are right. And so can you touch a little bit about sort of the inflection point that we've been seeing lately with mostly verbal and online abuse currently, although there has been examples, January 6th, for instance, where people were so convinced of their rightness that they committed crimes, beat police officers, broke windows, trespassed, made threats, essentially it's attempting to overthrow a government action. Yeah. Tried to kill Mike Pence, the vice president of the United States. Pretty serious stuff here because of a belief in their rightness. Yeah. Can you tell me about why do people believe they're right about things and get so into it that they will be willing to risk their freedom and actually democracy?
Okay, so this is it amuses me a little bit, right? I'll go with this, right? Like, you're sitting here listening to this podcast, and Paul's just said these things, right? You're doing one of probably two, maybe three things, right? Either one, maybe you're the few who are just sitting here kind of neutral and be like, oh, let's see where they're going with this, right?
Right.
Most of you have probably felt a way. You're like, bullshit, I ain't listening to this shit, and you're off of there.
They already turned it off.
Or you're like, yeah, hell yeah, they need to be tried, right? Something along those lines, right? You've already agreed in your mind whether or not we are speaking truth or not truth, right?
Right.
Falsities, right? Effectively, the concept of righteousness, right? And this is the easiest way I think I've boiled it down in my own head. We are kind of our own gods, effectively. That is what we've made ourselves as a culture. Again, I'm going to go back to that culture. America, you can be anything, right? That's a lot of power to be anything, right? And that's, if we're
not only
looking
be
at
anything, you can do anything.
I can do anything, I can be anything, I can be whatever I want, I can prove myself anyway. Yeah, I can do anything, right? Like the bootstrap mentality, right? And if I'm looking at that, we as a culture, again, I'm going to highlight this, if we think that something's right, we'll be damned if someone tells me it's wrong, right?
And so what does that mean? So then that gets into what I call post-truth. Mm-hmm. So we live in a post-truth era where basically if my personality and my opinion sounds good enough, what methods and what rubrics do we put it through to see if it has any weight or scrutiny?
And that's the terrifying part of our age right now, right? There was a time in our culture, right? You go back, like we're in the 20s, like let's go back like 50, maybe 60 years, right? There was a time where if I believed something, I had news, I had media, I had information sources outside of myself with identified experts who would come on to tell me what is actually true, what's wrong here, right?
So we believed experts.
Yeah,
back in the day.
The thought of the matter is like we still, like, again, were we being pulled to sway here and there?
Probably.
Yeah,
we
probably.
always have been.
Yeah.
There's always people using power and control to manipulate people.
Yeah, but the idea is that because our stream of information was much more limited, we had fewer sources to go through to challenge my own beliefs, and we had more sources that we relied upon to challenge our beliefs. In our modern digital age, where everyone, at least in our culture, has the ability to have access to the internet on my phone right now, I can Google search it, I can find the information right now, and there are a million people with their own voices online. Again, we are making a podcast right now, putting our own voices online.
Right.
Experts in our field. Basically, you now have more than any other period in history, the ability to find the person you believe to be your expert,
your guru,
and use all of their information to support the information you already believe. And again,
all of their opinions.
All of their opinions, right?
Right.
And the studies have already shown this, right? We've already got the studies out there that show in psychology and, you know, in mental health, we are very biased individuals. Studies show that we will spend 70 to 80%, it's probably even higher nowadays, of our time searching for sources that prove the things we already believe or agree with the things we already believe, right? Whatever you believe, you can find someone else to support it out there and say, see, this is evidence, right? So if we're looking at this term, this sense of righteousness, right, and why I'm right and others are wrong, right, we've just gone through this media explosion where media has been devalued, right? Everything has been politicized.
Journalism is no longer supposedly respected, right?
And then you look at all of that, and I have access to find my community of people to believe whatever the hell I believe right now. You end up with this kind of new societal swing where in America, again, freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want. That's my freedom. I can do whatever I want, right? We have now gotten to a culture where we've devolved into this: screaming matches online, anger of someone daring to say I'm wrong, doing these evils, these wrongdoings in front of me, right? And again, that goes to the last note, right? When I'm online, I'm not a threat to anyone to really do anything to me, more or less, right?
I'm hidden behind a digital moniker, usually.
And basically, it's another concept we've talked about, like mob mentality, the anonymity. Yeah. The principle, like, if you give somebody a mask and have them try to do a wrongful act, they're more likely to do it because their identity is hidden, right? If you tell someone no one will ever know you're going to be part of this, studies say that most of us have a heightened percentage chance that we're actually going to do it. So you take all of that, this real simplified, I'm right, I'm an American, I have the freedom to do all these things, you shouldn't silence me. I'm righteous, I have plenty of information to support my righteousness.
And opinions.
And I have a platform to yell and scream.
Okay, yes, and so that is a good summary of how we find ourselves at this point where there's a lot of chaos and a lot of misinformation and a lot of people that... it's bizarre. If you ask somebody what's going on with the government, you're going to get 20 different answers, right? You're going to hear the government's the hero, the government's the enemy. Wait, we like the FBI this week. Oh, wait, this week we hate the FBI. They're all in line with conspiracy.
It's all a puppet, man.
Right.
There's not a government.
It just depends. And what I find is that it just all goes back to what we want. And I think what we've figured out is, as a society, we don't know how we're evolving, but we're not sure what kind of society we want.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're willing to use abuse back to power and control to get the type of society we want. And to be honest, I think a lot of people don't want a democracy. I don't think they want popular opinion to rule. I think they want it their way.
Yeah.
And thus, you hear all these news stories about power and abuse on both sides.
Yeah.
Whether it's verbal, whether it's stochastic terrorism, whereas somebody who's a very persuasive person might talk about killing certain people, or they should die, or they should pay, just sort of making these sort of idle threats, and then somebody who is going through a hard time, or easily led, or has some sort of paranoia, picks up a gun and actually tries to do it. Yep. Right. So they're not responsible, although they've been saying this stuff because they've got self-restraint of living in a society, but they are causing indirect abuse. For instance, there was a congresswoman in Arizona, Gabby Giffords, who was shot multiple times, and a bunch of people died because this person had in their mind that she was some sort of evil person, and they're convinced of it. Yeah. And if you know her, or if you've been around her, and her husband's Mark Kelly, you know that, I wouldn't say she's an evil person. It sounds like she's a public servant that's been doing her best job, and she wouldn't hurt a fly. Luckily, she didn't die. She's sort of somewhat recovered from this, but this is sort of what we're kind of, things can lead to violence. And I do think in a mature society, we listen to other viewpoints, and we try to find a middle way that is best for all of us. But I think, like, going back to the melting pot, we have so many different cultural opinions here, and our country's so large. So in a large city, we have different possible values or reasons we want certain things. But if I live in a rural area or an area with more cornfields, I might want different things, right? Yeah. And if I am an adherent of a certain religion that is wanting to have their way, they might convince me that I need to do this thing. So there's a lot of confusion out there because I do think there's a breakdown of the grand narrative of what America is. So that can lead to power and abuse. So let's talk about, well, actually, we did kind of talk about the abuse tactics. One thing we didn't talk about a lot is guilt, using guilt. Yeah. Because we did talk about coercion and threats, intimidation, isolating a person, minimizing, denying, or blaming the other person, emotional degradation, gaslighting, and economic means. But let's talk about guilt. Tell me about that.
Yeah, like guilt and shame, right? Like if we're going on our product of righteousness here too, right? Think about that, right? Like oftentimes, again, right, someone who's going to be using my power to abuse, I'm going to try to play on even maybe what you believe is right, and I'm going to use that against you, your own righteousness, to get you to do what I want, right? Now, again, we're going to use religion. I'm going to use religion at this point because it's an easy one to use. Again, we are not knocking on religion. I don't think. Are we knocking on religion?
I don't think so. I think we're trying to
highlight some struggles.
The hard part about our society is if you use an example, somebody is often offended immediately and turns off their brain. Yeah. So I would say we're not knocking religion. There's like any entity or any sort of concept. There's always positive things about it and negative things about it, depending on the people or organizations involved in that particular thing. And with religion, there are tons of religions around the world. Christianity, for instance, without Catholicism, has, according to Wikipedia, somewhere around 33,000 distinct denominations.
Wow.
Around the world.
That's
so when we talk about religion, we're talking about, I think, an organized way of having spirituality.
Yeah, so spirituality methodology of beliefs, right?
It's a grouping of beliefs or practices that you could that are spiritual, but then become sort of an entity of its own. So let's go. So back to you. What about religion?
I'll kind of hit it with that real quick as I transition into this. Right, think about the whole concept of power and abuse, control, all the things we're talking about like this. Like, let's say I'm going to talk about the concept of fire. Is fire evil? No, fire is not evil. Fire is extremely useful. Fire is a huge blessing to us. Can I burn a home down with fire? I can definitely burn a home down with fire. Nothing really inherently at face value, at least in my opinion of things, seems to lead to a level of like, oh, this is a bad thing. It's generally, what are we doing with it? How are we utilizing it? Again, I can drown myself by drinking too much water. If I drink too much water, I need water to live. Water's super healthy for me. If I drink too much too fast, I drown. Right? So I'm abusing my water, right? So I'm going to go with religion. I'm going to get back on topic at this point now, right? In a religion, right, again, if somebody says, oh, yeah, I'm a follower of X faith, and okay, we go, here are the tenets of that faith. If you're not meeting the tenets of that faith, I don't think you can classify as followers of this faith. You need to classify as something else, right? And again, that's how we define everything. It's how we group things together. Is someone a Democrat? Are they a Republican? We need to be able to look at, okay, they follow X things. We can label them as this or that. It's how we make sense of the world, right? Is it a giraffe? It's going to have these features, right? So in religion, again, this gives a really great standard for someone to be able to cause that guilt, because they can use this standard of, if you are a follower of a religion, especially our shared religion, this is what you need to follow, and I can twist and I can use that thing to guilt you into that experience. Again, let's use a classic one. There are many religions that believe this is the role of what a wife should be, right? And again, that's not I'm not saying it's a bad or good thing, right? But we can take a piece of it and go, well, a wife has to always respect her husband. Husband always has the right last say. So if you are arguing against me, you're being a bad X. Fill in the blank of your faith, right? I can use your own righteousness to guilt you into doing what I want. I can abuse my power, my knowledge of what's important to you. Again, this is the whole point of the thing. I can only abuse if I have power. People without power cannot cause power abuse because they don't have power. They can harm you in other ways, but they can't really do that power abuse cycle to you because they don't have it, right? Got to have some kind of power.
Very good point.
I guess like if I'm impoverished, I get you in the street and I beat you with a stick. We would say I have power at this point. I have a stick, right? This is an example of me abusing my power, which is my stick.
Yeah, or my gun.
Or my gun,
right.
whatever I have, right? Like this is the concept of my power.
Using a weapon to extend your power.
Yeah, my weapon, my knowledge of your beliefs, my social media platform, right?
Gender roles.
Anything, right? Where I have an imbalance, I have some strength over you, I have some power, and now I'm going to use that to guilt you, to shame you, to make you feel less.
Excellent. So I think we've talked enough about kind of the negative things. What about people reclaiming their own voice despite what may be happening in America or cultural shifts or politics or
just in general sense of being abused?
Yeah, just how can someone reclaim one's voice if they've been abused, and how can they heal from abuse situations?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, this is a multifaceted point,
right? This is not a single answer.
Obviously. Yeah, like, let's go with that, right? Healing, right? At least in my opinion as a therapist, right, takes many different forms. It may look similar. There are some similar paths we can take quite often, right? But your own individual healing journey is always going to look a little different, right? I do EMDR. I help people heal from trauma on a daily basis. Paul does EMDR. We're doing kind of the same technique quite often, right? But like, what somebody's going to experience, what they're going to have to go through to heal, what that's going to look like for them is kind of a wild card every time, right, Paul?
I think so. I think that to reclaim one's voice, therapy is obviously one way of doing it, and therapy can be quite useful because it can help you understand through psychoeducation what has been going on. It can help you have a safe place to talk about things that you can't talk about maybe with friends or relatives, and obviously the person or entity that abused you. I mean, one of the first things we have to do to heal is we have to get away from the abuse. Now, if it's a person, we've got to get help, calling 911 or the domestic violence hotline, which is in our notes. Obviously, that's a big step. But what if it is a job or a religion that you're in, or a church, or a family unit that has a cycle of abuse in it? These can be difficult to get away from. So that's when we go into boundaries and education. So one of the biggest things I think for people to escape abuse and to be able to separate themselves so they can heal, you have to separate yourself first to an extent, is learning. Learning about boundaries, learning about the cycle of power and control, learning about abuse. What is abuse? Am I being abused?
Yeah.
Learning about who you are, self-reflection, journaling, reading books, talking to other people that have been through similar experiences, whether it be online or in person. Very important to get other voices in your life. So therapy is just one of those voices, but therapy is a series of techniques. And a good therapist should not just chat with you every time. They should be teaching you things. They should be educating you. They should be pointing you to resources. They should be helping you set goals. EMDR therapy, as we mentioned, is something where somebody has a traumatic event that they can clearly identify, or multiple ones that they can identify, that seem to cause patterns in their behavior and their emotions for years or months after. And we can work on reducing that impact, and so they can feel like I have a better range of emotions and feel more behaviorally sound. We can process things emotionally so that people can move through and heal. We can use ACT therapy, internal family systems, other advanced techniques to help people stop suffering so much post-abuse, because there's other podcasts about this, but abuse is a pattern, and we know that from behavior, but it gets stuck in our nervous system sort of as a pattern. You can see it if you have enough time away from the abuser and see how you act now that you're quote unquote free from the abuse. Yeah. It's still a pattern in your mind and your nervous system.
Still feel powerless, still feel useless.
It can change your view of the world, change your view of spirituality. It can change your view of sexuality. It can distort your view of yourself. It can cause you to self-sabotage, use drugs and alcohol. It can cause you to make really poor decisions, or even reoffend on other people. Since I went through pain, now I'm going to cause you pain, right?
Yeah.
So it can do a lot of things that are not healthy. So therapy is a very good way to get help. But if you're in the situation, you obviously need more support than that. And then building a support system outside of therapy. If you can get involved in, if you don't have economic resources, finding out how to get free access to different things that can help you. And everybody's journey is different. But what are some thoughts you have around that?
Yeah. So like, I'd start with kind of the first step to reclaiming my voice is recognizing that I've lost it. Right?
Oh, good. Yes.
And that, again, I'm on fire. I need to put out the fire. But if I don't think I'm on fire, do I need to put out the fire?
That's a good point.
Right? I obviously have a skin rash. I go to the doctor, and the doctor screams, "Oh, God, you're on fire." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I have a skin rash. Give me some ointment," right? Again, this is an extreme. I like extremes that make it easier for me to see the world. And for a lot of my clients, if I'm being abused and I don't even realize that I've lost my voice, how do I start with knowing I need to reclaim my voice? Again, we've talked, again, I'm always going to say all forms of abuse are always a negative, right? I cannot see a moment like I talked earlier, fire is not good or evil. Abuse may be a concept that I'd say, okay, this is an evil. I'm abusing something. I'm using something in a way it shouldn't be used, right? Abuse is always negative. In that fact, again, I will highlight, again, we've talked a lot about these abusers don't realize what they're doing, right? I'm not trying to give them an out, right? But they are not aware of their own pain or how it pushes them to do these things. So if I'm thinking about any concept of healing, I always have to start with, are you aware of what's happening, right?
And that takes perspective, which does take getting a little bit away from the situation, if possible, even for a few hours of a week, because oftentimes people that are in domestic abuse relationships, we can see that from the outside quite easily, domestic violence, they have no idea that this isn't a normal relationship.
Yeah.
Their parents maybe acted that way, maybe their first girlfriend or boyfriend did that way, and so you have to have the awareness, and I think that's where education comes in, and educating yourself, and slowing down and going and asking yourself tough questions. Am I being treated nicely? Do I have autonomy? Can I leave? Yeah. So that means, can I leave a job? Can I leave this church? Can I leave, can I leave this organization? Can I leave this relationship?
Still accept me if I do this?
Will my family allow me to do what I want to do, or are they holding me hostage? You know, what happens if I want to express myself in different ways? Am I punished? So am I allowed to have a difference of opinion with the people that I live with, or the people I know, or whatever it might be?
Go with that. Teenagers out there, you may still be punished for expressing your views and saying, "Dad, fuck you." Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on this podcast.
You're allowed to say it.
But the point is, right, again, don't take this and run away with it and go, I can do whatever I want because the podcast says if you punish me, you're abusing me. No, that's not what we're saying.
Not saying that. Wait. So there's a difference between consequences and punishing in an abusive way.
Yeah.
So a consequence for a teenager who's escaping out of their house, because unfortunately, when you're under 18, abuse is a lot different.
Yeah.
When you're under 18, the state says you have to stay with your parents unless they're abusing you, like actually physically or sexually, or abusing you or neglecting you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the state in most states do not consider emotional abuse in their assessment.
Which is ridiculous.
However, that is kind of the state where that's kind of where our culture is at the moment.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you run away or steal something from your parent, or steal their car, or don't follow their rules, the parent can actually call the police on you, and the police will bring you back. Now, if you can prove that you're being abused by calling Child Protective Services or the police or anything like that, then the state will help you become autonomous, put you with a different relative, or put you in a group home or something where you can get help and get away from an abusive parent, because this happens oftentimes. It's the same thing with elders. Elders are often dependent on people. There's an elder abuse hotline. And so, you can't just do anything you want in society, obviously. But what we mean by punishment, I think, is egregious. What I was meaning is egregious abuse for expressing different viewpoints. Oftentimes I tell parents, I'm like, listen, let your child have an opinion. Yeah. There's a difference between opinions and rules. Yeah. You may not believe that marijuana is good, but don't yell at your child's opinion. Say, if you think marijuana is great, that's fine, but you can't use it here, right? That's called a rule.
That's a boundary.
But by saying, if you say anything about marijuana, then I'm gonna yell at you, scream at you, take away all your things.
Tear you down, tell you how awful you are. Yeah, I might be like, okay, that seems to be some emotional abuse.
It's going to have the opposite effect anyway.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this real quick. Did you know that 1 in 3 and 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men in the United States have experienced some sort of physical abuse by an intimate partner. And that is from a study on the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website. On a typical day in the U.S., local domestic violence hotlines receive approximately 19,159 calls, which is about 13 calls every minute. In 2018, domestic violence accounted for 20% of all violent crimes. Abusers' access to firearms increases the risk of intimate partner abuse or death at least 5-fold. When firearms have been used in the most severe abuse incidents, the risk increases 41-fold. 65% of all murder-suicides involve an intimate partner, and 96% of these victims of these crimes are female. That's pretty bad.
I mean, like, I'll just go with it. Like, I've got this back and forth constantly in my head. Did I know these numbers were that high? No. Is it shocking? Yes. Is it surprising? Not exactly.
No, not exactly.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of growth to do in our society. I won't get into this too much, but I do believe
human race.
As a human race. But I've always said in education, we're always learning facts and figures and historical things and how to do this and how to do that. But there isn't really a class on emotions. And relationships.
No, not really. That'd be great.
I think, well, they've started doing some in some schools, but it seems to be an extracurricular, and it seems to be more schools with a lot of funding. I think that should be a basic.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Not just something teachers teach on the side.
Pour into your citizens.
Right, exactly. So if we want to create a peaceful society where people know how to get along, we have to teach these skills when you're a kid. Not when you're in trouble with the law or in a in a toxic relationship as
I will make it
adult.
That does remind me, as you said, that we were originally trying to tell them how to reclaim their voice. I think we got lost a little bit.
We did, yeah. So reclaiming your voice. Well, we did talk about it. You have to get away.
You got to do some notice it's happening. Notice it's happening. Get away so you're safe, right? And then
build with any resources that you can possibly build, whether it be friends that don't coerce you and abuse you, whether it be organizations that are advertising services through nonprofit organizations or social services, therapy, counseling offices, anyone who isn't taking advantage of you in some way. Certain religious organizations offer outreach, certain cities have programs. We have to start building your resources up. Slowly but surely, even if you don't have any financial, because a lot of people that have been abused don't have financial resources. Yeah. So we have to be able to take advantage, and that means we have to learn how to use the internet. We need to enroll, if you need to enroll in free classes through your city. Adult education classes are available in almost every major city. There are online classes. You can learn different things on YouTube if you have access. The issue is you at least need to have some sort of a digital device. If you do not, you can go to your local library, which allows you to use computers and different things like that. And you can ask for people to help you. There's a list of resources. We're not going to even list them all. Obviously, if you're in crisis, call 911. If you want to know more about domestic violence, if you're not sure if you're in a domestic violence relationship, you can call 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233, or visit www.thehotline.org. That's thehotline.org. You can visit the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence website, which is an acronym, ncadv.org, for fact sheets. But, and generally, I mean, police officers, hopefully, should know about domestic violence. So, I mean, even just calling 911 if you're not sure.
It can be a starting point.
It can be a starting point, absolutely. So there are lots of ways, and, obviously we're both therapists, and so we see a lot of people that have gotten out of a domestic violence situation or a power and control dynamic. We see them afterwards while they're working on healing. Yeah. Sometimes, though, we have people come in and they don't realize they're in a domestic violence relationship.
I shouldn't laugh, but yes, sometimes the sad reality is they have no idea.
They have no idea that they're being controlled and abused. Oftentimes because the domestic violence has not devolved into hitting, into physical violence, but there's sexual manipulation, there's emotional abuse, there's financial abuse, there's digital abuse, and even intimate partner stalking. Stalking isn't just about strangers stalking you.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's been stories in the news where people have been using those Apple tags, which are really helpful if you lose your phone a lot, and putting them on people's cars, in women's purses, things like that. And or just here's one I was even thinking about. This falls under emotional, but I've even heard this one where a lot of people in relationships, let's just go with women, are afraid to have their own political or moral opinions that differ from their partners.
Yeah.
Because if they do, they will be punished. And I mean by punished, I mean abusively coerced.
Torn down in some way.
Right. And so oftentimes we get people in counseling that have no idea that they're in that type of relationship. It's just the relationship they know. And the problem is this. We love the person. It's not like they just hit us on the first date. There was positive things that happened, and we might be dreaming or believing that someday we'll get back to that positive honeymoon again. And so we're just in it. Or if I don't have this person, I'll be nothing, right? Or I'll be homeless, or I'll be whatever, right? Or, my religion says I can't get a divorce, I can't separate, or my family will disown me. There's lots of pressure on people to stay, unfortunately, in these things. So if you're a person out there that isn't in one of these and you say, well, why don't you just leave? Or why don't you just, I would say, instead of saying that to the person, say, how can I help you be safe? How can I help you with your journey?
I think that goes well into the third point we're kind of highlight here. You've identified you're in abuse. You're getting out of the abuse. You're seeking safety. We're in that third step where sometimes in order to just even do the second step of getting out of the abuse, I have to be building this new community, this new set of resources, tools, right? If I'm sitting around by myself, right, going, am I good enough? Can I get out? And the only other voice I have is myself, I'm going to just keep believing whatever I believe, right? That's why we come to the therapist. That's why we read these things. That's why we make these podcasts that you can listen to, right? We are, we have to build, we have to go into community, we have to find basically others to help us start reclaiming that voice of ours.
Exactly. And it can be people that you trust or people that have been through abuse. So there are support groups. For instance, the YWCA has support groups.
Good group.
There's plenty of groups on the internet. There are meetups about this. And you'll be surprised if you're vulnerable. I mean, listen, you've already been abused. So, it seems rejecting sometimes to talk to people socially and say, hey, can you help me out with this? Or do you know anything about this? Some people are going to scoff, right? Because that's a cultural issue. They don't want to talk about it.
Pull yourself up by
They don't
your
want to hear about
bootstraps.
it. By the way, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps, let me just address that for a moment. Did you know when that term first originated, and you can look this up, that was actually used as an absurdist joke about the idea of extreme individualism. Did you know that? It was actually literally making fun of the fact that you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's actually physically impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You will fall over. And you actually need someone, to help. So essentially, this was a joke that has now been claimed as a cultural meme that people should do it themselves and not have societal help. Anyway, it reminds me of Cats.
The musical?
Yeah, no, the actual animal, the pet we have domesticated here. Dogs are very aware of their dependence on you. They will come for you. They want food. They want affection. They need walks. They're dependent, and just like that, we're dependent on different things in society. But cats, they are dependent on you, but they act like they're not. Take it or leave it. My affection. I'm going to go over here.
A little back and forth.
Right, a little bit. And so I often, I laugh when people say they did it themselves.
Again, go with that, right? This is America. If you say, someone help me, you are immediately going to lose, I'm going to use social status, or I'm probably using it wrong, you're going to lose the clout, right?
Sure.
As the young people are going to tell me, right? Like, you immediately are less than you could have been, right? Any politician who wants a shot at presidency has to be a self-made man.
Right, which is impossible because you had someone raising you. You drove on roads. Who paved those roads? there were policemen and fire people
Teachers who
and
cared for you,
education,
right?
and all of this sort of thing, and who grew your food and all of this. So we are interconnected as a society, and thus that is why domestic violence is such a huge issue, because we're interconnected in power control dynamics, because we have to figure out how to communicate and get along. But we have to understand, if you're a person in a place of privilege, and many people that maybe listen to this podcast are, and let's say you pay taxes. Obviously, you might want to be politically active to figure out where those taxes are going. But when you say, I don't want to pay taxes, in my mind, you've lost credibility, because the taxes don't just go into a flame, an incinerator. That's what's paying for the roads. That's what's paying for the stoplights. That's what's paying for licensure enforcement. That's what's paying for education, so that we don't, live in that society. Now, it's not perfect, right? That's why we have politics. That's why you can get involved in your local area. But we have to remember that we are interconnected. And so if you're a person of privilege and you want to keep that privilege, you've got to give back to society in some way, because otherwise people who are underprivileged are not going to have any resources to do what you think might be a good thing, which is becoming a member of society. And they might be grappling over limited resources and thus resort to, quote, crime, stealing, different things, because they don't feel that their narrative is that they can have a place in the society. And so just like that, if you're a person in power and control, there becomes great responsibility.
I'm going to go with, it might be a little stretch to say paying our taxes is the way to save
I'm not saying
economic crisis.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you're a person with lots of money and you can pay your taxes.
If you're a person in privilege and power.
Right.
And in this example, we're using the concept of money, right? And again, we can all pay our taxes because, it's a percentage of what we make, so we can all pay our taxes, sure. Right? I go with that. If you're a person of money and you're sitting around and going, wow, I hate that homeless person on the street, blah, 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 blah. Why doesn't he get a job, blah, 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 right? Blame him. I wish I didn't see homeless people. Well, you're kind of abusing or not even really using your privilege or power, because you could be funding community initiatives to get that person into jobs, get that person housing, get that person healthcare, so they're not constantly fighting their sickness and illness that keeps them from going to a job. But the point of the matter is, if you have power and you're sitting around going, why isn't X changing? You're kind of misusing, maybe we could say in some cases abusing your power, if you're not really using that privilege, using that power to make the change that you want to see happening.
Right.
Is that what you're telling me, Paul?
Yes, exactly. Then you're just wallowing in your individualism. Why aren't more people like me? Which is
you're placing the blame on others. You're doing the thing that the abuser does, where it's
correct.
It's your fault that you're like this.
Exactly. And that is a very reductionist viewpoint, immature, back to the toddler. Yeah. We are all interconnected, right? Everything we do as a society has effects. Now, it may not be as direct or obvious what those effects are.
Yeah.
But just that's why I said micro versus macro. Yeah. In the micro, we see it in individual relationships. Yeah. We have to evolve and learn how to communicate and to be able to share power and control. As a society on a macro level, we have to figure out, if we want nice things, we have to invest in nice things. If we want our kids to be educated at a certain level, we have to invest in education. Mm-hmm. We have to figure out ways to solve the common problems that humans face. And that is a whole nother podcast. But I do think...
We could go for a while on that one.
Right. And I do think, though, that the power and control dynamics play out all the time. When you're a person of power, you have a great ability to enact positive change to people that don't have power.
Yeah.
Or... you can blame them for not having power, talk about how special you are, how great you are, and how awesome you are for accomplishing what you did. But in my opinion, that gets old.
Yeah.
You're not planting trees. Great. I'm so glad you made all this money and did all these things. In our culture, power often is associated with money.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful. Okay, now what? Do you need more money?
Get more money. Is
that it?
This American way.
Right. Is that it? Or are you going to figure out how to... make a utilitarian society where you aren't afraid of, certain things that could happen due to inequality and other issues.
Hoard all the money, and then when I get bored, shoot myself into space.
Right. There you go.
That's the way to do it.
That's what dragons do in the myths. They just hoard all the gold and then sit in a cave all lonely and mad.
They do not shoot themselves into space, though.
No. So
They're too
anyway,
cool.
back we went a little off topic, but I think it's okay because all these topics are connected to not only the individual relationship, but how we live. And I think it's an important concept. And not everybody's called to go into how we live in politics and fighting about the local taxes and all of that, right? Some people are called to help people. Some people are called to, just play whatever role they find and the thing they love. But one of the main points is what happens on the micro level happens on the macro level and vice versa. So we have power in our own relationships to work on. Maybe we're not an abuser. We don't see ourselves as an abuser, but am I using subconsciously or consciously some of these tactics against people in my lives? Have I done these things?
Yeah.
Right? We all have. It's all a spectrum.
Yeah.
So there's some self-reflection there for all of us.
I would like to hope that I am not an abuser. I would like to hope, right?
Right.
I would probably need a few more eyes on me to tell me whether or not I am doing that appropriately, right? But right now, my wife loves me.
That's
I
good.
know she loves me. I have some power. If she's loving me, she's giving me some power because she loves me.
Right.
What am I going to do with that power today?
That's a good point. We all have an opportunity to share it, make a positive impact, or try to control. And I think that the opposite of love is fear.
Yeah.
And so when we're afraid of not getting our needs met, and when we're afraid of others, and we're afraid of sharing, then we usually often go to trying to control.
Yeah.
And that is what leads to abuse.
Yeah.
So that being said, hopefully you've all enjoyed this talk. If you are looking for counseling, I'm going to talk about that in the show notes, but Joshua does take clients both in person and online, and you can check out him on his website, which will be in the show notes as well. So I really appreciate you joining me.
It's been a blast.
And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician Podcast with Paul Krauss. If you're enjoying the show, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. If you'd like to, please give us a rating on iTunes. It really helps get out the word about this podcast. If you are looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I can now provide 20 hours needed to become EMDR International Association certified, as I am an EMDRIA consultant. I have groups and I have individual sessions, both online and in person. You can check out details by going to my website, counselingsupervisorgr.com or healthforlifegr.com, and send me a message. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment with a local counselor in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids area at Health for Life Counseling and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based upon literature they have read and their experience in the fields they are in, these should not be viewed as the definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you are in a crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Line at 1-800-273-8255, or you can just dial 988. Did you know that you could support your local bookstore by shopping at www.bookshop.org? You can order books from the comfort of your own home while supporting local brick-and-mortar businesses near you. Michigan Mental Health Counselors Association and other counseling associations are very important to keep quality counseling and therapy services available in the United States. It helps increase education, promotes best practices, and works on legislation to make sure that counselors and therapists can have a living while they're working and helping our communities. So if you're not involved, please join your local association or the national associations, American Counseling Association, Arizona Counselors Association, Michigan Mental Health Counselors Association as an example. If you want to get trained in EMDR therapy, I recommend EMDR Training Solutions. I'll have a link in the show notes. You can use the code INTENTIONAL at checkout and get $100 off your first training. Until next time, I'm wishing you all a safe and peaceful week.